Kara Robinson was spending the night at her best friend Jess's house, and that morning the two of them were planning to head to a nearby lake for a relaxing day together. After breakfast, Kara called her mother, Deborah, who was at work at the time, just to ask for permission before they left. At that point in her life, Kara was living only with her mother because her parents had already divorced and her father was living separately. Before they could leave for the lake, Jess asked Kara for a small favor. Since she wanted to take a shower first, she asked Kara to help water the plants outside while she got ready. Kara went outside and started watering the flowers in front of the house, and everything seemed completely normal until she noticed a black sports car suddenly pull up nearby. A large man stepped out and called out to her, but within seconds the atmosphere became deeply unsettling as he instructed Kara to get into the car and remain quiet. Once inside the vehicle, Kara was placed inside a plastic storage container because her small body could fit inside it easily. That was the moment she realized she was no longer free to leave. Even though she felt overwhelmed, Kara tried to stay calm and began memorizing every detail she could, including the barcodes printed on the products inside the container. After driving for some time, the man finally stopped in a secluded area and opened the lid. He warned Kara that he was going to tie her up and gag her, while making it clear that he would keep his gun with him at all times and would not hesitate to use it if she tried anything. At that moment, Kara's mind immediately started thinking about escape, imagining what might happen if she ran the first chance she got. But fear kept holding her back because she knew one mistake could cost her life. Eventually, the man tightly restrained and gagged her before driving her again, this time taking her directly to his house. Meanwhile, Jess had finished showering and came back outside only to realize Kara had completely disappeared while the water hose was still running. Panic quickly set in, and she immediately called Deborah to ask if she had suddenly picked Kara up because of some emergency. Deborah explained that she was still at work, and the moment she noticed the worry in Jess's voice, she became deeply concerned herself. She tried contacting Ryan, Kara's boyfriend, but he also believed Kara was still at Jess's house. Realizing something unusual had happened, Deborah finally decided to contact the authorities. Meanwhile, Kara arrived at the man's house, where she was immediately instructed to stay quiet and avoid drawing attention. After helping her settle in, the man brought her into a room and carefully explained the rules she would be expected to follow while staying there. He made it clear that he intended to stay in control of the situation at all times, and he also insisted that Kara address him in a very specific way. On top of that, she was expected to follow every instruction he gave and ask permission before doing anything, while constantly feeling that there would be serious consequences if she disobeyed. Not long after that, the man began questioning her about every detail of her life, asking about her age, her family members, where she lived, her boyfriend, and her friends, along with other questions that made her deeply uncomfortable. Kara felt overwhelmed by the situation, but despite everything she was experiencing, she still managed to stay focused and think clearly. Rather than panicking, she concentrated on getting through the situation, staying calm and quietly observing as much information as possible while waiting patiently for the right chance to leave. Back at Jess's house, Deborah contacted her ex-husband Ron, who was Kara's father, and informed him that their daughter had disappeared from Jess's yard without any explanation. The news immediately alarmed him, and he decided to head back as quickly as possible. Not long afterward, the police finally arrived, but because Kara had only been missing for around 2 hours, the officers believed there was still a chance she had simply run away or left voluntarily without telling anyone. Instead of launching a serious search immediately, they chose to question neighbors first, file a report, and advise Deborah to return home in case Kara called the house. Hearing that response only made Deborah regret contacting the police because she felt nobody was taking the situation seriously enough. As Deborah desperately tried calling every one of Kara's school friends that she could think of, Kara herself was still trapped inside the house, forced to continue answering the kidnapper's disturbing questions. However, because she knew information could become the key to surviving, she decided to play along and slowly began asking him questions too. During one of their conversations, the man admitted that he had spent 9 years in the Navy before eventually being discharged dishonorably. He also claimed that Kara would be released once he was finished with her, although she had no way of knowing whether that was true or just another manipulation tactic to keep her compliant. Whenever the man briefly stepped away, Kara often thought about leaving, but each time she held herself back because she felt the moment was not right yet. She understood that getting through the situation depended on patience just as much as courage. At one point, the man tried pressuring Cora into joining him in something that made her uncomfortable, even though she was still very young. He expected complete cooperation and made it clear that ignoring his wishes could lead to problems. Since Cora appeared cooperative, he eventually allowed her to ask for something in return. And after noticing several animals inside the kitchen area, she asked for permission to go there. It turned out the man was obsessed with animals and kept several birds and small rodents inside the house. Afterward, he brought Cora back in front of the television and forced her to sit through explicit content while making her describe what she was watching. As night began to fall, Cora asked for permission to use the bathroom, and while she was inside, she immediately noticed a large window that looked like a possible escape route. However, the kidnapper followed her the entire time, leaving her with absolutely no opportunity to try anything without risking her life. Later that evening, the man started preparing dinner and ordered Cora to sweep the kitchen while he cooked. Even during something as simple as cleaning the floor, Cora stayed focused on gathering information that might help her survive, carefully memorizing details like a doctor's phone number attached to the refrigerator and several schedules written on a nearby calendar. Every small detail mattered because she knew that if she ever escaped, those pieces of information could become important evidence. Meanwhile, Deborah returned to the police station once again, after hearing from neighbors and Jess that Cora had apparently left in a black car. Even then, the police still believed Cora may have willingly gone somewhere with friends. But Deborah refused to accept that explanation because she knew her daughter's behavior better than anyone. Cora always informed her family where she was going, unless something had stopped her from doing so. Despite Deborah's concerns, the officers once again told her to go home and wait for a phone call instead of treating the case as a serious abduction. After dinner, the kidnapper brought Cora in front of the television and made her watch the news, hoping to see whether her disappearance had already been reported publicly. When no news coverage appeared, he began convincing Cora that nobody cared about her disappearance, including her parents and her boyfriend. But Cora refused to let his manipulation affect her mentally. Even though she was terrified, she continued staying emotionally controlled because she understood that losing focus could make things even worse. Not long afterward, the man forced Cora back into the bedroom and ordered her into the storage container once again because he wanted to call his wife without Cora making any noise. He tied and gagged her before shutting the lid, expecting her to remain completely silent inside the cramped space. But this time, the panic became too overwhelming, and Cora suddenly struggled to breathe properly while trapped in the darkness, eventually making noise as she fought through the panic attack. The man became angry, but he finally agreed to remove the gag as long as she promised to stay quiet. A few minutes later, after finishing the phone call with his wife, the kidnapper returned and let Cora out of the container. He gave her water along with anti-anxiety medication, and Cora realized she had no real choice but to take whatever he handed her. That night, she was ordered to clean herself up before going to sleep, and while doing so, she once again imagined possible escape scenarios inside her head. However, every plan still seemed too dangerous and likely to fail. Eventually, the man handcuffed both her wrists and ankles to the bed using metal carabiners attached above and below the frame, making escape seem nearly impossible. Exhausted both physically and emotionally, Cora finally drifted off to sleep. This is the girl who escaped, the Cora Robinson story. The next morning, Cora suddenly woke up and realized something important. She had awakened before the kidnapper. As she listened carefully to the sound of him snoring deeply, nearby, she slowly and carefully began opening the carabiners attached to the handcuffs. Even though panic was rushing through her body, she forced herself to stay calm and silent while freeing both her hands and feet one by one. Then, moving as quietly as possible, she carefully walked through the house without making a sound, managed to unlock the front door, and immediately sprinted away as fast as she could. Fortunately, Cora soon encountered two strangers who were on their way to work that morning, and she desperately begged them to take her to the nearest police station.
What do you want us to do?
Could you take me to the police station, please? Please.
Get in.
Thanks.
Thanks to their help, Cora finally escaped alive. But now the fight for justice was only beginning. At the station, a police officer named Aaron removed the handcuffs from Kara while she explained everything that had happened, including the kidnapping, the repeated abuse she endured, and every detail she could remember about the man who held her captive. She also explained how she managed to escape and how the two strangers had helped save her life. Afterward, Kara was asked to retell the entire ordeal from the very beginning, so investigators could gather as much information as possible. At the same time, a female officer named Bonnie interviewed the two people who had brought Kara to the station and asked them about the apartment complex where Kara had approached them for help. Bonnie also discovered in the system that Deborah had officially reported Kara missing nearly 18 hours earlier. Not long after that, Deborah finally received the phone call she had been desperately waiting for, informing her that Kara had been found alive and was now safe at the police station. After finally reaching safety, Kara was asked if she would be willing to return to the area where she had been held captive and try to identify the apartment belonging to the man who kidnapped her. The truth was that Kara could not fully remember the exact location because everything had happened so quickly. But despite the trauma she had just endured, she desperately wanted justice and chose to help the police anyway. When they arrived at the apartment complex, every building looked almost identical, making it difficult to narrow anything down. Aaron and Bonnie questioned one of the residents nearby while describing the suspect, but at first the man did not recognize who they were talking about. However, once Kara mentioned that the apartment was always covered with large curtains and that the man kept several animals inside, the resident immediately recognized the unit they were searching for and pointed them in the right direction. Bonnie was then sent to investigate the apartment while Aaron called for backup. Around the same time, Deborah arrived at the police station shortly after Kara had returned from helping identify the location. Since Kara was now safe, the police, along with Sheriff Jim, moved in to inspect the apartment themselves. But once they entered the unit, it became clear that the suspect had already fled. Even so, every detail Kara described perfectly matched what investigators found inside the apartment, confirming that this was definitely the place where she had been held captive. Sheriff Jim then instructed Aaron and Bonnie to have Kara officially confirm the identity of the apartment owner so they could proceed with a full search warrant and continue building the case against him. Back at the police station, Kara remained with Deborah while Bonnie presented her with several photographs of possible suspects. Without hesitation, Kara confidently identified the man who kidnapped her from the lineup. Bonnie then confirmed that the photo matched the registered tenant of the apartment, whose name was Richard Evanitz. Unfortunately, Richard had already disappeared before police arrived, but Kara continued sharing every detail she could remember, including the phone number for the family doctor she had seen on the refrigerator, and information about another person connected to Richard who possibly worked at Disney World. Kara was also taken for a medical examination, so investigators could collect biological evidence that the suspect may have left behind. As Deborah watched everything unfold, she struggled to process the horrifying reality of what her daughter had survived in less than a single day. Meanwhile, investigators began thoroughly searching Richard's apartment, and what they discovered quickly turned the case into something far bigger than a single kidnapping. Hidden beneath one of the animal cages, officers found a box containing several pieces of women's underwear that clearly did not belong to Kara, along with newspaper clippings about serial killers, missing children, and handwritten notes containing directions and other suspicious information. The moment Sheriff Jim saw those articles, he realized Richard might be connected to older unsolved crimes that had haunted investigators for years. At that point, capturing Richard became the department's top priority because they were no longer dealing with just a kidnapper. They were possibly hunting a serial killer. Soon afterward, police officers and family members began spreading Richard's photo everywhere in hopes that someone would recognize him or report information about his whereabouts. As investigators looked deeper into his background, Sheriff Jim uncovered troubling connections to several long unsolved cases. One of the newspaper articles involved a 16-year-old girl named Sophie who had suddenly disappeared from the front porch of her home. Then, about a year later, two sisters aged 12 and 15 were also reported missing from their house. Investigators eventually came to believe that Richard had been connected to those disappearances and that the girls had been kept hidden for some time before never being seen again. For 5 long years, the case had remained completely unsolved until Kara survived and provided the evidence that finally exposed the truth behind those disappearances. Even more chilling was the realization that Kara may not have been the original target at all. According to the investigation, Richard had actually been stalking Jess for some time. But because Kara happened to be outside that morning, she became the victim instead. Around the same time, Bonnie informed the team that they had successfully located Richard's wife, Ashley, exactly where Kara had remembered. Ashley was found working at Disney World, and unlike Richard, she was willing to cooperate with investigators. After hours of questioning and emotional exhaustion, Kara was finally reunited with her father, Jess and Ryan. Completely drained from everything she had endured, she asked to be taken home so she could finally rest. Meanwhile, based on information provided by Ashley, police traveled to Richard's mother's house, where they discovered that Richard had switched his black sports car with his mother's vehicle in an attempt to avoid detection. As the investigation continued expanding into multiple murder cases, Sheriff Jim decided the situation had become serious enough to involve the FBI. Shortly afterward, Bonnie visited Kara at her home, where police officers were still monitoring the area for safety. Kara was confused about why officers continued surrounding the house, but Bonnie explained that Richard was still missing, and they wanted to make sure Kara stayed protected until he was caught. Bonnie also warned that federal investigators would likely return to question Kara again because her testimony had now become critical to a much larger case. The next morning, Kara woke up and noticed police officers were still stationed outside her house, which only reminded her that life had not returned to normal yet. Wanting to escape the constant tension surrounding her, Kara decided she wanted to go see Ryan instead. Deborah immediately objected because Richard was still on the run, but Kara no longer wanted to live in fear or remain trapped in the nightmare emotionally. In her mind, what had happened was already part of her fate, and she just wanted to start reclaiming her normal life again. Not long afterward, Jess came over to visit Kara and make sure she was truly okay. Kara even encouraged her friend to ask anything she wanted to know, and for the first time, she began opening up completely about everything she had experienced during the kidnapping. At the same time, investigators continued questioning Ashley, but she struggled to believe her husband was capable of committing such horrific crimes. Her loyalty to Richard made it difficult for police to gather useful information from her. However, things changed when Richard's sister, Stephanie, began cooperating with investigators. Stephanie explained that Richard was likely driving Ashley's car with altered license plates, and she also admitted that she had long suspected this was not the first time Richard had harmed young women. More importantly, she revealed that Richard had contacted her the previous evening. Thanks to the information Stephanie provided, police traced Richard to a motel outside the city and rushed there immediately, hoping to finally capture him. Unfortunately, because the location was far away, officers arrived too late. Richard had already fled again, leaving behind only some of his clothes inside the motel room. Even though the suspect escaped once more, Sheriff Jim felt some relief knowing Richard was now focused on staying hidden instead of returning to watch Kara. Later on, Sheriff Jim personally visited Kara and explained the horrifying truth behind the investigation. He told her that Richard was believed to be the serial killer responsible for murdering 3 girls around Kara's age 5 years earlier. Jim did not come there to pressure Kara or tell her how to live her life. Instead, he wanted to thank her because surviving and escaping had done something investigators had failed to accomplish for years. Kara had helped expose a serial killer. Jim also told her that women with her level of strength and composure were extremely rare, and if Richard was eventually captured, it would largely be because Kara had survived long enough to help bring him down. Not long after that conversation, Sheriff Jim received another update revealing that Richard had used a phone to contact another relative named Pamela, who lived outside Florida. Investigators believed Richard might be heading there next, so Aaron quickly reached out to Pamela, and fortunately she agreed to cooperate with law enforcement. Meanwhile, Kara continued pleading with her mother to let her resume normal activities because she desperately wanted to feel like herself again instead of constantly being treated like a victim. Eventually, Kara and Jess went to a baseball field to support Ryan during one of his games, while at the same time officers nearby quietly conducted surveillance in case Richard appeared. Unexpectedly, the officers finally spotted Richard, but the moment he noticed police presence, he immediately tried to flee the area. A chase quickly began as officers pursued him, before he could disappear once again.
Suspect is running northbound on 16th. Unit 113 in pursuit.
Units 216 and 34 arriving from the west. Be advised 113. Over.
Eventually, Richard became completely surrounded with nowhere left to escape. Panic overwhelmed him, and even though he was armed, he could not bring himself to shoot at the officers closing in around him.
Unit 113.
Dispatch, we have the suspect. Suspect is armed, requesting backup.
Realizing he was trapped and about to be captured, Richard made one final decision and turned the gun on himself instead.
Put down your weapon!
Drop it! It's over!
Drop your weapon! Put down your weapon!
Drop it! It's over!
He died at the scene before police could arrest him. The next morning, Kara woke up and immediately noticed that the police officers who had been guarding the house were finally gone. For the first time since the nightmare began, the atmosphere inside the home felt calm again. And Deborah even prepared breakfast for her daughter, as they tried to return to some sense of normalcy. During breakfast, Deborah informed Kara that Richard had done the unthinkable the previous night, and that everything was finally over. But instead of feeling relieved right away, Kara became upset and frustrated because she believed she should have been told immediately when it happened, not the next morning after everyone else already knew. Not long afterward, Sheriff Jim personally came to the house and apologized for not informing Kara sooner, because she deserved to know the truth as soon as possible. Even with Richard now dead, Kara still carried a deep anger toward him because she never got the chance to face him in court or watch him answer for what he had done. More than anything, Kara wanted justice. She wanted Richard to stand trial, hear her story directly, and spend the rest of his life rotting in prison for the pain he caused to so many innocent girls and families. Later on, Kara sat down with her mother and apologized for lashing out at her over the past few days. After everything that had happened, Kara understood that her mother was only trying to protect her, but at the same time, she needed Deborah to accept something important. No matter how much they wished otherwise, nobody could change what had already happened. Kara did not want to spend the rest of her life being seen only as a victim or someone broken by tragedy. More than anything, she wanted her mother to see her for who she truly was now, a survivor. And with that powerful realization, the story comes to an end. So the moral of the story is sometimes the bravest people are just terrified kids trying to survive long enough to make it back home to their mom.